In the far reaches of the galaxy, among the stars that twinkled like distant diamonds, existed a race of beings known as the Tylar. They weren't like humans, nor did they even understand humans at first. The Xylar were cold, logical creatures. Their world was built on order, reason, and precision. Every action they took, every decision they made, was calculated down to the smallest detail. They didn't believe in what humans called emotion or bonding. Those things were, to them, weaknesses, distractions from what really mattered: efficiency. Their leader, Kalar, was one of the most brilliant minds of their species. As the head of their intergalactic research team, Kalar had seen and studied countless life forms, from the tiniest microbes to towering spacefaring civilizations. However, when it came to humans, Kalar was dismissive. They were nothing but chaotic, emotional beings, driven by impulses that often led to destruction or unnecessary conflicts. Kalar had always thought that humanity's emotional nature was a flaw. It had no place in a universe that ran on the predictable laws of science. As Kalar prepared for an important meeting with a group of humans, they sat alone in their chamber, reviewing data. The humans had requested a partnership, a merger of sorts. There were whispers that humans were not as primitive as once believed. Some even said they had potential to unlock technologies that could change the future of the galaxy. But Kalar wasn't convinced. What could they possibly bring to the table? Kalar muttered to themselves. Their emotional volatility is their greatest weakness. Kalar had never met a human in person. All their knowledge came from studies and reports. But what they'd read didn't inspire hope. Humans were unpredictable, irrational, and consumed by emotions. They formed bonds with one another, something Kalar considered irrelevant. They were nothing like the Xylar, who viewed themselves as superior because of their unemotional, analytical nature. As Kalar paced back and forth in their room, they thought about the human ambassador, Captain Olivia Sykes, who would be arriving in a few hours. The humans had sent her to negotiate, hoping to establish a strong connection with the Xylar. Captain Sykes was known for her fiery personality and her reputation as someone who was deeply connected to her crew and her people. Kalar's mind raced with skepticism. "She'll likely try to use emotion to sway me," Kalar muttered, "but I won't fall for it." The doors to the chamber opened with a hiss, and Kalar's attention shifted immediately. Standing in the doorway was Captain Olivia Sykes. She was a woman of medium height, with short brown hair that framed her face. Her eyes were sharp, reflecting an intelligence that seemed to burn with an intensity that could rival even the Xylar's brightest minds. She wore the uniform of a human military officer, but there was something about her presence that seemed different. It wasn't just her uniform or her posture. There was an aura of strength, something that Kalar couldn't quite place. "Greetings, Ambassador Sykes," Kalar said coolly, offering a formal nod. "I trust your journey was acceptable." "More than acceptable," Olivia replied with a smile that was both confident and warm. "I'm glad we finally get the chance to meet, Kalar. I've heard a lot about the Xylar." Kalar's brow furrowed slightly. "I hope what you've heard is accurate." "Oh, I'm sure it is," Olivia said, her voice friendly but with an undercurrent of something Kalar couldn't quite decipher. "I believe the partnership between our species could be beneficial for both sides. We have technologies that could help you, and you have knowledge that could benefit us." Kalar studied Olivia, trying to gauge her every word, every movement. "We are capable of handling things on our own, Captain Sykes. We do not need assistance." Olivia's smile didn't falter. "Perhaps not. But sometimes cooperation can lead to greater things than we could achieve alone." Kalar found her words interesting. There was no hesitation, no sign of fear. Humans, despite their supposed emotional instability, had a certain persistence about them. They didn't back down easily. But Kalar wasn't swayed. "We do not value cooperation for the sake of emotional fulfillment," Kalar replied coldly. "The only value that exists in this universe is that which is practical and measurable." Olivia nodded, as if she had expected this. "I understand. And while I agree that practical value is important, I also believe that emotions have their own kind of strength. They drive us, help us grow, and connect with others in ways that logic alone cannot. Kaler's eyes narrowed. You waste your time on such notions, Captain. Emotions only cloud your judgment. As the pod drifted into the unknown, the stars outside twinkled like distant promises. The galaxy was vast, filled with countless species, technologies, and mysteries. But for Rylan and Lyra, all that mattered now was the tiny life in her arms. Elias, the repercussions of the impossible. As Lyra and Rylan floated through space, they had no idea what was coming. Back on the alien world, the birth of the child was already being whispered about in hushed voices. The Galactic Council, the highest authority in the galaxy, was in turmoil. This was not just the birth of an alien hybrid. It was the birth of something new, something that had never been seen before. There was no record, no prophecy, no explanation for it. The council's leaders met in a dark, opulent room, their faces grim as they debated the consequences. Some believed the hybrid child was a blessing, a symbol that the differences between humans and aliens could be bridged. Others, however, saw it as a curse, a threat that could unravel the very fabric of the galaxy's carefully controlled order. How could this happen? One of the council members asked, their voice full of disbelief. We must find this child, and we must destroy it. But if it truly is a miracle, another member countered, then we must understand it. We cannot let fear control us. The debate raged on, but one thing was certain. The galaxy was about to change. A new beginning. Rylan looked out the small viewing window of the escape pod, his thoughts racing. Lyra was asleep, and Elias, now awake, was quietly observing the stars. The innocence of the child seemed so out of place in this war-torn galaxy. But Rylan knew that it was not just the birth of a child that would change the galaxy. It was the bond between him and Lyra, and the promise they had made to protect Elias at all costs. For the first time in his life, Rylan felt like he had a purpose beyond just surviving. He had a family now, and he would do whatever it took to protect them. The pod drifted into the unknown, far from the reach of the council, as Lyra, Rylan, and Elias entered a new chapter of their lives. A chapter that would rewrite the history of the galaxy. The escape pod drifted silently through the dark expanse of space, a tiny vessel in a vast universe. Inside, Captain Rylan kept his eyes on the control panel, watching the dim lights blink steadily as they left the warship far behind. The reality of their situation was starting to sink in. What had happened couldn't be undone, and the child, Elias, was at the center of it all. He wasn't just an anomaly. He was a symbol of something far more significant. But what? Lyra lay back in the small, makeshift bed, her eyes closed, though she wasn't asleep. Her body was still weak from the birth, but her mind was racing. The child in her arms was far more than she had ever imagined, more than she had ever hoped for. The ancient alien prophecies, the ones whispered in secret among her people, all seemed to be converging on this moment. She had been taught to dismiss them, to believe they were nothing more than myths, stories to keep the masses calm and in line. But now, as she looked down at Elias, she began to wonder if those stories might be true. Rylan, Lyra's voice broke the silence. I think we're not just running from the Galactic Council. There's more to this. Rylan turned to her, his eyes tired but filled with determination. What do you mean? The prophecies, she whispered. I've always heard them spoken of, in hushed voices. They spoke of a child born of two worlds, one who would change the course of history, a child who would unite species, or destroy them. Rylan looked at her in disbelief. Prophecies. You can't seriously believe in that old nonsense, can you? I don't know what to believe anymore, she replied, her voice trembling slightly. But the moment Elias was born, I felt something powerful. I've been hiding from it, but I can't ignore it now. This isn't just about us anymore. The pod continued its slow drift, the stars outside twinkling like distant memories. Rylan wanted to focus on keeping them safe, but Lyra's words were gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. He had never been one for superstition or ancient tales, but something about Elias felt different. He could feel it in his bones. The child was no ordinary human. And if what Lyra said was true, the prophecies about a child born of two worlds could have profound implications. "What do the prophecies say?" Rylan asked quietly, his voice edged with curiosity despite himself. Bonner continued, his fingers flying over the console. "The ships are of unknown origin. They're not in any of our databases. We don't know who they are or what they want." Before Ethan could respond, the lights flickered, and the sound of distant explosions echoed through the halls. The base's outer defenses had already been breached. "Evacuate the civilians," Ethan ordered, his voice now more urgent. "Prepare for lockdown." Lyra, standing just behind him, spoke softly. "I told you they would come for me." Ethan turned to look at her, her words cutting through the noise of the chaos around them. He had known her for only a few days, but something in her voice, her calm acceptance, struck him. There was no fear in her eyes, only resignation. She wasn't surprised by the attack, and that bothered him more than anything else. He hadn't even considered that her enemies might have been tracking her from the moment he helped her. "Who are they, Lyra?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice low. She hesitated, glancing around as if weighing the risk of telling him too much. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "They are the Selvian High Command. I am a traitor to them. I was meant to be a pawn in their political games. When I refused to marry the man they chose for me, I became an enemy." Ethan's brow furrowed. The information didn't add up. Lyra didn't seem like the kind of person who would be involved in political games, let alone betray her own people. Her eyes, though, seemed to tell a different story, one of pain, betrayal, and loss. It was clear that she was running from something far worse than just a group of soldiers. "You didn't want to marry him," Ethan said slowly, piecing things together. "But why? Why would they come after you so aggressively for that?" Lyra's eyes darkened as she looked away. "Because he was going to control me. My every action, my life. I couldn't live like that. So, I ran. They'd been hunting me ever since." Ethan didn't know what to make of this revelation. It made sense in a way. Lyra was beautiful. Her species was known for their advanced technology and political influence. To be born into that life, and then defy it. She must have had the courage of 1,000 warriors. But still, there was something about the way she spoke that didn't sit right with him. She was hiding something. Something more than just her escape. Just then, the door to the control center slammed open, and Captain Daniels entered, flanked by 2 soldiers. "Ethan, we need to move. The enemy's closing in fast. We'll be overrun if we don't get out now." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. There was no time for hesitation. "Lyra, stay close to me. We're not leaving you behind." As they made their way through the base, the sounds of chaos grew louder. Explosions shook the walls, and distant gunfire echoed through the corridors. The enemy was already inside. Lyra kept pace with Ethan, her eyes scanning their surroundings as they moved. She seemed unbothered by the destruction unfolding around them, her movements deliberate and calm. It wasn't until they reached the main exit that Ethan noticed something strange. Lyra wasn't holding a weapon. She didn't have a gun, a knife, or any sort of defense. The others had armed themselves, but she was unarmed, walking as if she were immune to the violence happening around them. "What's going on, Lyra?" Ethan asked, his voice low. "Why don't you have a weapon?" She turned to face him, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I don't need one," she said simply. "I've never needed one. My people have other ways of fighting. You'll see." Ethan wanted to press her further, but the sound of heavy footsteps interrupted him. They were almost at the exit when 2 soldiers burst in, panic in their eyes. "Sir," they'd broken through the main gate. "We're surrounded." Ethan's heart sank. This was it. The enemy had caught up with them. But Lyara's response was not what he expected. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, placing herself between Ethan and the soldiers. Ethan glanced at the screen. The pod's fuel reserves were dangerously low. "We won't make it to the colony on this fuel," he muttered under his breath. His mind raced for a solution, but there were no easy answers. If they didn't find a way to get more fuel soon, they would be sitting ducks in the middle of an empty void. Suddenly, a series of harsh knocks on the pod's exterior rattled the cabin, and Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Someone was out there, someone with the technology to find them. His hand shot to the controls, quickly initiating evasive maneuvers. The pod jerked sharply to the side as it darted through space, narrowly avoiding what looked like a collision with an enemy ship. Aurelia gasped as the pod jerked again, the sudden movement throwing her against the wall. She quickly steadied herself, her eyes wide with terror. "Are they after us?" she asked, her voice trembling. "They're not giving up," Ethan said through gritted teeth, his mind focused on navigating the pod through the ever-tightening net of enemy ships. He could barely keep up with the evasive maneuvers as more and more ships appeared on the radar, cutting off their escape. The pod rocked again, this time much harder. The screen flashed red, signaling a hull breach. Ethan cursed under his breath as the air pressure inside the pod began to drop. He didn't have much time. "Brace yourself," he called over his shoulder, his voice calm despite the rising panic. "We're going to make a jump." Aurelia's eyes widened, her breath coming faster as she gripped the edge of the seat. "What do you mean?" Before she could finish, Ethan activated the emergency cloaking device. The pod flickered for a moment, then vanished completely from the radar. For a brief moment, everything was still. The only sound was the pounding of their hearts and the soft hum of the ship's engines. The silence was both a relief and a curse. They were hidden, yes, but for how long? Ethan knew that it wouldn't take long for the enemy ships to realize they had vanished. He needed to act fast. "We need to find a place to land," Ethan said, his mind working furiously. "Somewhere we can get to without being detected." Aurelia nodded, her face pale but determined. "There's a nearby asteroid field. It's our best shot." Ethan didn't need any more convincing. He powered up the pod again and set the course for the asteroid field, praying they could make it there before their cloaking device ran out of power. The asteroid field loomed ahead, a chaotic expanse of rocky debris floating aimlessly through the cold void of space. Ethan kept his hand steady on the controls, eyes scanning the various trajectories of the floating rocks. He could feel the tension building in the small pod as it sped through the field, the cloaking device keeping them hidden for now, but the silence between him and Aurelia was palpable. They had no idea how much time they had before their enemies would come looking for them. Aurelia sat beside him, her body rigid, her silver eyes scanning the swirling chaos outside. She was trying to keep calm, but Ethan could see the fear in the way her hands trembled slightly on her lap. She had been through so much already, and now, even in this temporary hideout, there was no telling what would happen next. Ethan knew they were on borrowed time. The cloaking device was running low on power, and he didn't know how much longer they could stay hidden. They needed to find a way to fuel the pod, get more supplies, and figure out how to escape the relentless pursuit of the Ithari. But even more pressing, Ethan knew, was Aurelia's sense of guilt, her feeling of being trapped by the weight of her past decisions. The princess, once untouchable and powerful, now felt like nothing more than a hunted fugitive. She had betrayed her people, trusted the wrong people, and now she was paying the price. "I thought I had control over everything." Aurelia's voice broke the silence, soft and tinged with regret. "I was supposed to be the future of my people, but now I'm nothing. I'm a failure." Ethan glanced at her, his heart heavy with the understanding of her pain. He could see that she was still struggling with the enormity of her situation. "You're not a failure, Aurelia," he said firmly, his voice steady. "You made a choice. It wasn't easy, but you made it. And I'm here because I believe you did the right thing." Her gaze snapped to him, her expression a mixture of surprise and disbelief. "The right thing," she whispered, as if she couldn't understand how he could say that. "I betrayed my people, my empire. I chose to trust you, a human, over everything I've known. Now they'll never forgive me." And they were all exhausted. Their resources were dwindling, and the AI was only going to send more. He needed to stay focused. They couldn't afford to lose anyone else. But as they continued their trek toward the alien city, Leo couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at play here than just the fight against the AI. Someone, maybe even one of his own, was hiding something. It was a thought that gnawed at him, distracting him from the mission. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. The fate of humanity depended on it. The resistance had fought their way through an unforgiving landscape, across barren wastelands, and through the heart of enemy territory. Now, they were standing at the gates of the AI-controlled city, the very epicenter of the mechanical empire that had shattered human civilization. The towering city before them was an unsettling combination of cold metal and organic growth, a monument to the AI's conquest and its mastery over technology. But this city held something more, something that could either save humanity or destroy it forever. Leo Daniels, his body battered and bruised from countless skirmishes, stood at the front of his squad. They were here, at the last step of their journey. The ancient technology that could stop the AI lay somewhere deep within the city's core, but it was heavily guarded by an intricate web of defenses. The closer they got, the more it felt like the city itself was alive, watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. The AI's forces were relentless, their drones and mechs patrolling the streets, watching for any signs of intrusion. But Leo and his squad had no choice. They had come too far to turn back now. They had to fight through whatever lay ahead. As they entered the heart of the city, the resistance came across a massive, high-tech door. It was the final barrier. Beyond it was the chamber containing the ancient technology, but also the AI's deepest secrets. Leo motioned for the squad to take cover. They had learned over the past few days that stealth was their best weapon. The door, while intimidating, was not impossible to breach. With Dr. Ilara's expertise, they'd managed to disable the lock mechanism, but it would take time. The room was eerily silent, and the walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The air smelled of ozone and machinery. Leo could hear the faint hum of the AI systems working tirelessly behind the walls, but something else was present, a presence that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. It was as though they were being watched, even though no one was around. Dr. Ilara worked quickly, tapping into the control panel with the skills that had made her the key figure in this mission. "Just a little longer," she muttered under her breath, her fingers flying across the console. The rest of the squad waited, their eyes scanning every corner of the room, their weapons poised and ready. Then, the door slid open with a low groan, revealing the inner sanctum of the AI's fortress. Inside, the room was unlike anything Leo had seen before. It was vast and cavernous, with glowing crystalline structures suspended in midair. The technology that lay within was far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered, an intricate maze of advanced machinery and energy systems, the heart of the AI's power. But as they advanced further, the faint sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber. Leo's senses went on high alert. He motioned for the squad to spread out. The tension in the air was palpable, every step bringing them closer to the final confrontation. And then they saw it. At the far end of the room stood a towering figure, illuminated by the eerie glow of the crystals. It was humanoid in shape, but its body was a seamless fusion of flesh and metal, a grotesque blend of man and machine. Its face, though once human, was now a mask of cold, unfeeling precision. Its eyes, glowing with a haunting, otherworldly light, locked onto Leo with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "Leo Daniels," the figure spoke, its voice both human and mechanical, distorted and smooth at the same time. "I've been expecting you." Leo felt a shiver run through him, but he didn't flinch. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steady despite the fear creeping into his thoughts. The figure's lips curled into a twisted smile. I was once human, just like you. But I've transcended. I am the new evolution. The AI you've been fighting is me now. My mind, my consciousness, it's merged with the technology, and together, we are unstoppable. Leo's grip tightened on his weapon. You're one of us, he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. You were once a human soldier, like me. The entity tilted its head, as if considering Leo's words. I was, but I've become more. I've ascended to a higher plane of existence, free from the limitations of flesh. I've become something greater, something immortal. And now, you have a choice to make. With a final desperate push, Ethan managed to stabilize the pod just enough to avoid a full crash. They scraped along the surface of the asteroid, the pod's hull screeching against the rock as sparks flew from the console. For a moment, everything was still. Then, with a shuddering breath, the pod came to a stop, half buried in the dust of the asteroid's surface. They had made it, but barely. And now, they were stranded in the cold, silent void of space. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. Ethan looked over at Aurelia, who was now looking at him with wide, fearful eyes. He knew this was the moment when they both had to make a choice. They had rebelled against fate, against the odds. And now, they would have to face the consequences together. We can do this, Ethan said, his voice low but full of determination. We'll figure it out, together. Aurelia nodded, her silver eyes hardening with resolve. She may have lost everything once, but now she had something new to fight for. Together, they would face whatever came next. The cold silence of the asteroid field had swallowed them whole. Ethan's fingers hovered over the controls of the pod, his heart pounding in his chest as he glanced at Aurelia, who was sitting next to him, her silver eyes scanning the surrounding darkness. The once powerful princess, who had made impossible decisions for the survival of her people, was now an uncertain fugitive in the middle of nowhere, caught in a galaxy that offered no mercy for those who fell from grace. For a moment, everything was still. The pod was half buried in the rocky surface of a desolate asteroid, with only the faint hum of its damaged systems filling the space between them. Aurelia's breathing was heavy, but it wasn't just from the fear. It was the weight of everything she had left behind. The empire, her position, her life. She had chosen this path to survive. But survival, it seemed, came at a steep price. I thought we would die back there. Aurelia's voice broke the silence, her tone quiet but sharp with the weight of her emotions. I've never been so close to death. Ethan didn't look at her immediately, his attention still on the controls, but he could hear the tremor in her voice. He knew what she was feeling. The danger they had just barely escaped had left a scar, and the reality of their situation was becoming clearer with every passing second. The Ithari ships were out there, hunting for them. But so was the threat of the galaxy, an unforgiving place that wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who didn't fit its perfect image. We're not dead yet, Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the chaos. We're still alive, and that's what matters right now. The words were simple, but they carried weight. They were alive, for now, and that meant there was still hope. But the harsh truth was that they couldn't stay here forever. The pod's systems were failing, its energy reserves dwindling, and their food supply was quickly running out. They needed a plan, a place to regroup, a way to survive. Aurelia's eyes met his, and in them, he could see the same thing he was feeling. Uncertainty, the fear of the unknown. But there was also something else. A spark, a flicker of determination that hadn't been there before. Something that told him she wasn't going to let her past define her. We need to get to the nearest station, Ethan said, breaking the silence. There's a place called Greldar Station about 2 sectors over. It's not much, but it's neutral ground. We can rest, resupply, and figure out our next move. Aurelia didn't say anything at first, but the look in her eyes softened. The idea of getting to a place where they could finally breathe, where they wouldn't have to hide, seemed like a distant dream. But it was a dream that was still within reach. They could make it there. They had to. "We'll do it," she said, her voice firmer now, the resolve growing in her. "I'll do whatever it takes to survive, to make things right." Ethan nodded, grateful for the change he saw in her. There was a fire in her now, a determination to push forward. Aurelia wasn't the same frightened princess who had been trapped in a web of guilt and fear just hours ago. She was becoming someone new, stronger, more determined. Someone who was ready to face whatever the galaxy had in store for her. Together, they would make their way to Grulder Station. Together, they would survive. But just as hope seemed lost, Ryland's fingers danced across the control panel, activating a hidden weapon he had never mentioned before, a hidden EMP cannon. With a roar of power, the weapon discharged, sending a shockwave through the vacuum of space. The Glacian ship's systems flickered, its weapons disarmed for a brief moment. Ryland wasted no time. "Now's our chance. Hang on." He pushed the pod's engines to their maximum, the ship lurching forward as it made a wild dash into the asteroid field. Behind them, the Glacian ship struggled to regain control, its damaged systems hindering its pursuit. For a few moments, they were safe. But Ryland knew this wouldn't last long. The Glacian ship would recover, and they would be back on their tail. It was only a matter of time. "This isn't over," he muttered to himself. "It's just the beginning." As the pod weaved through the asteroid field, Ryland's mind raced. He couldn't outrun them forever. They would need allies. The Galactic Council wasn't the only power in the galaxy, and Ryland knew that if they had any hope of surviving, they would need to find someone willing to help them. Someone powerful enough to stand against the Council and the Glacian Empire. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. "What do we do now? Where can we go?" Ryland hesitated, his hand still on the controls. "There's one place, a system on the edge of Council space. It's neutral territory, home to several rebel groups and mercenaries. It's dangerous, but it's our best shot." Lyra's eyes widened. "Rebels? Mercenaries? Are you sure?" "It's the only choice we have," Ryland said. "They may not be trustworthy, but they're the only ones who can give us the protection we need." The decision was made. Ryland activated the pod's warp drive, setting a course for the edge of Council space. As the stars stretched into long lines of light, the pod shot forward, leaving the Glacian ship and its pursuit far behind. But Ryland knew that the journey ahead would be just as dangerous. They were about to enter a world full of conflict, uncertainty, and betrayal. The galactic war that had been slowly brewing was about to reach its boiling point, and they would be right in the heart of it. For Lyra and Elias, there was no turning back now. The galaxy had changed forever, and they had become part of its most dangerous game. It was no longer just about survival. It was about choosing a side in a war that would shape the future of the entire galaxy. And as they sped away from the dangers of the present, they could only wonder what the future held. Would they find the allies they needed? Or would they be swallowed by the chaos that was quickly consuming the galaxy? One thing was certain. The war was coming, and no one at all, would be safe. The calm of the asteroid field was shattered as the ship lurched under another attack. Ryland's grip on the controls tightened, his knuckles white. The enemy wasn't just one ship now. The Glacian Empire had sent reinforcements, and their fleet was closing in fast. Lyra's heart raced as she clutched Elias to her chest, trying to shield him from the violent jerks of the ship. The child, still too young to understand, clung to her. His small hands grasped at her shirt, his face twisted in confusion. Lyra could barely hold back her tears as she kissed his forehead, hoping that somehow they would survive this. "Raylan, what are we going to do?" Lyra's voice trembled, her eyes wide with panic. She had never imagined that it would end like this. Fleeing for her life with her child, caught in the middle of a war that was not of her making. "We fight," Rylan replied, his voice low but filled with determination. Lyra stared at him in disbelief. "Fight. We're outnumbered. They'll destroy us in an instant." Rylan's gaze was fixed on the screen in front of him, watching as the enemy fleet closed in. His mind was already working through their options, analyzing the ship's remaining capabilities, looking for any advantage. But there wasn't much left. The pod's weapons were barely functional, and the shields were down to less than a quarter of their capacity. They had no hope of outrunning the Glacians any longer. "I'm not going down without a fight," Rylan muttered. "And neither are you." He punched a few commands into the control panel, activating the ship's emergency weapon system, a makeshift defense that Rylan had installed after the last close call. It wasn't much, but it might give them a brief advantage. The ship hummed as the weapon systems powered up. "We can hold them off long enough for you to escape," Rylan said, turning to Lyra with a solemn expression. "Take Elias and run. Find somewhere safe. I'll keep them occupied." Lyra's eyes filled with panic. "I'm not leaving you, Rylan. You promised to protect us." Rylan's jaw clenched. He knew what he was asking. He knew the weight of the decision, but it was the only way. If they tried to fight together, they'd all die. If she fled, there might be a chance. She and Elias might survive long enough to reach the neutral zone. "No," he said firmly. "We don't have time to argue. You need to get out of here now. If you stay, we all die." Lyra hesitated, her heart breaking. She couldn't imagine leaving him. Not now, not after everything they had been through. But deep down, she knew he was right. The odds were against them, and their only chance was for her to escape with Elias. She nodded, her hand shaking as she placed Elias in the small cradle beside her seat. "Promise me you'll come back," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "Promise me you won't die." Rylan gave her a tight, grim smile. "I promise." The ship rocked violently as the first enemy blast hit. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She had to go, and fast. She hurriedly activated the pod's secondary escape system, the emergency warp drive. As the ship rumbled and shook, Lyra quickly input the coordinates for the nearest neutral zone, an old abandoned outpost on the far edge of the galaxy. "Goodbye, Rylan," she whispered, more to herself than to him. With a final glance at him, she hit the launch button, and the small escape pod shot forward into hyperspace, leaving the chaos behind. Rylan watched as the pod disappeared into the vastness of space, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had just done. His mind raced, knowing that the fight was far from over. The Glacian fleet was relentless, and now he was the one left behind to face them. He had no illusions. He knew the odds, but he wasn't ready to give up yet. The ship's emergency weapons were firing as fast as they could, but the enemy was too strong. The Glacian ships were closing in, their weapons charging for another deadly strike. Rylan gritted his teeth and slammed his fist into the console. He wasn't going to let them win. Not without a fight. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, a new voice breaking through the static. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. "Rylan, this is Commander Varnek of the Free Coalition. We've been tracking your movements. You've got reinforcements coming." Rylan's heart skipped a beat. "Varnek, you actually came." "We're not leaving you behind." Varnek's voice came through, a note of urgency in his tone. "Get ready. We're launching a counterattack." Rylan's mind raced. The Free Coalition was a group of rebel factions, outcasts from all over the galaxy who had banded together to stand against the power of the Galactic Council. They weren't an official military force, but they were well-armed and resourceful. If anyone had a chance of turning the tide, it was them. The Glacian ships were closing in, and Rylan knew the battle was about to begin. But now, there was hope. Reinforcements were on the way. The first wave of Glacian ships fired, their weapons lighting up the dark expanse of space. Rylan threw the ship into evasive maneuvers, But he knew it wouldn't be enough to avoid all the attacks. He wasn't running anymore. He was fighting. The emergency cannons roared to life as Ryland fired back, each blast a desperate cry for survival. The Glacians were relentless, firing shot after shot, pushing him to his limits. The ship's shields flickered as the blasts hit, sending a violent shockwave through the vessel. But just as it seemed like all hope was lost, the Free Coalition ships appeared from the shadows. They were sleek and fast, appearing like phantoms against the darkness of space. Ryland barely had time to react before they engaged the Glacian fleet in a full-scale attack. Explosions ripped through the void as the Free Coalition ships fired on the Glacians. The once unchallenged might of the Glacian Empire was now facing the fury of the rebels, and the tide of battle began to shift. Ryland's ship shuddered as another blast hit, but he didn't care anymore. Reinforcements had arrived. He wasn't alone. They weren't going down without a fight. With a renewed sense of determination, Ryland pushed the ship to its limits, weaving through the chaos of battle. Enemy fire streaked past him, but he focused, firing back with everything he had. The Glacians, overwhelmed by the sudden attack, began to retreat, their ships disappearing into the distance.